Hello and welcome to another Excel demo with Rich Kerr. In this scenario, we're going to take a look at the ability to create a two-axis chart, which allows us to display data that might be of different scale. So I'd like to show on my chart the dollar amount plotting of the expenses and the revenue, but I also want to show the margin percentage. And I want to show it on the same chart. So first let's figure out the margin percentage, the profit margin. So if you want to pause the video and set up your sample data, and then we'll proceed. So in column D, let's first figure out the margin. So we'll start with equals, and in parens I'll do the revenue minus the expenses. So C2 minus B2, and then we'll divide that by B2. So it's the profit over the expense, and that gives us 29% for the first example. And you may have to format that cell as percentage, and I will double click that to fill it down. So now I have my months, I have my expenses, my revenues, and my margins. So I'd like to create a chart that can show all this data at once. So in typical fashion, I'll make sure I'm clicked on at least one cell in the range, and I'll choose Insert, and I'll go with a standard two-dimensional column chart. So column, the first icon in the column chart selection, and it creates a very generic column chart. But notice that you can't actually see the margins plotted on the chart, and that's because they're percentages, which means in terms of actual numbers, they're decimals. So they're so small that those columns don't even display when they're on the same chart that has other columns with amounts of 500 or 1,000, etc. So how do we get the margins to display along with the dollar amounts that represent revenues and expenses? So I'm going to go to the Layout tab of Chart Tools, which will make it easier for me to select the margin series. I can't actually see it. I might be able to see a little bit of it on the one that has a negative on April, that negative 26%. So I could kind of click there, and now I can see the little sizing or selection bubbles that appear on the edges. But it would have been even easier for me to go to this current selection part of my layout tab, and from there choose series margin. So whichever method you use to select that series, we're now going to format the margin series. So I'll click Format Selection, and when the Format Data Series window appears, I have the option to show that margin on a secondary axis. So I'll choose Secondary Axis and choose Close. So now the margin has its own axis on the right-hand side, expressed as percentages. Now, it still looks a little wacky because it's reflecting the margins as another column, and it kind of doesn't resonate very well for the audience. So I'm going to do an additional change. With the margin series still selected, I'll go back to the Design tab of my Chart Tools section of my ribbon and choose Change Chart Type. But I'm only changing the chart type for the margin series, not the revenue and expenses. And I'm going to change the margin to a line and click OK. So now, in addition to the columns expressed in dollars that have the expenses and revenues, I'm expressing the margins as a percentage with a secondary axis on the right-hand side, and to make it stand out even more so, separate from the dollar amounts, I've got it expressed as a line rather than columns. As a final step, I think I'll have my chart on a separate sheet so that I have more room to format it or add other components. So I'm going to choose Move Chart Location on my ribbon and add it to a new sheet, and I'll call it Two-Axis Chart, and click OK. And now we have it on a full sheet unto itself, and I've got my margins and I've got my revenue and expenses. That's it. That's how you create a two-margin or a two-axis chart in Excel. I hope you find this helpful. Please tune in again soon for more Excel videos. Have a productive day.